Alright. We're heading into the mid-season break for Formula 1, which so happens to be well past the actual halfway mark of the season. But of course, being at this part of the year, you know what that means. It's time for the F1 YouTubers Pretend to Know Something video, or as I've called it, my 2024 F1 mid-season driver ratings. Real catchy, eh? It's a cliche as old as time, as it's this intro monologue that I've scripted out, and I'm guessing y'all just want me to dig straight into it. And fair enough, we will. But before we delve into the meat and potatoes, I need to pull yet another cliche out of the bag and acknowledge the continued support of this video sponsor, Surfshark VPN.
Hold on, stay here please. I know y'all know what a VPN is. I know most of us are partially educated, but just quickly, for those who don't know, a VPN is a service that protects your information by encrypting all the data that you send through the internet, thereby protecting said data and keeping any minuses from getting at it. And as our parents always say, always use protection on the internet. We don't want our stuff being compromised, and in an age where everyone is an introvert, privacy is our most valued asset, given the upper 1% has priced us out of everything else. We love to just kick back and forget our troubles with a nice dose of streaming, but even that's a headache sometimes, given they love to limit the content based on your location, which honestly doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me or anyone. But with Surfshark, you can change your location, at least virtually, and thus gain access to content otherwise not available in your region. I mean, it ain't quite teleportation, but it is about as close as we're gonna get right now. Sound good? Well, secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter coupon code JoshRavel for an extra 4 months free with your subscription. So for around about a couple of bucks a month, when all is said and done, you are fully protected. And with those 4 free months and a 30-day money-back guarantee, I have to ask, what the bloody hell are you waiting for? Okay, back to the show. So we start off with the adopted Australian halfway Andy Warhol driver at Sauber, Valtteri Bottas. Being at the bottom of the standings and behind his teammate does not do lad here any shred of justice. He has been constantly let down by the lack of performance in the car, and them 30-second pit stops at the start of the season were decidedly unhealthy toward getting any amount of result. It's hard to stand out when your car is constantly at the back of the field through no fault of your own. All you really can do is just do the best with what you've got, and in the case of Valtteri Bottas, he's been leaving his teammate in the dust. It's just a shame that it'll all come to naught, as his years in F1 appear to be numbered. Problem is, yes, he has outshone his teammate thus far, but that teammate of his hasn't been $1 million. It was a nice occasion to see Zhou Guanyu race in front of his home crowd in Shanghai. He had realized his dream, and China could finally watch one of their own, live and in living color, compete against the world's best. And this guy, he's a likable personality, and he did at least deserve his shot at Formula 1 when he came in a couple of years ago. But we're halfway through his 3rd year, and he hasn't improved much in that time, and in some races he underperformed badly. Whenever people try to argue his case for staying in Formula 1, it always circles back to that one qualifying performance in Hungary last year. Now, yeah, there was some good driving, but how much longer are we going to hold on to that? If that's the only ammo you've got, then perhaps lad here hasn't done enough to stick around. It was known that his performances needed to improve this year, and they just haven't. Not really. And it kind of speaks volumes when his sponsors are presenting funds rivaling that of the GDP of Moldova, and teams still won't bite. As much as we like him, we are going to have to savor these next few months, because this will be the last time that Zhou Guanyu will race in Formula 1. But at least he won't be alone. He'll be joined at the glue factory by the Eagle. You know, I kind of feel bad for this guy. No, really, I do. Williams elected to re-sign this guy for 2024, despite the rancid season that he had the previous year and the various free agents people were clamoring for Williams to sign. They kept their faith in this kid, in the hope that he would show that potential that he had shown on the road to Formula 1. Instead, it appears that not even by the halfway mark of the season, Logan Sargent was being thrown to the wolves, in a scenario we've seen all too often, where the second-string driver is expected to turn chicken shit into chicken salad. You get the sense that he's been hung out to dry, and that his seat in the team is doomed no matter what, especially given that for the vast majority of the year thus far, he hasn't had the same car as his teammate. He has ironed out a lot of the mistakes from the previous year, but the spark we expected to see hasn't been there. One could argue that some of that is down to the disparity in upgrades and lack in confidence from within the team, but how can you instill that confidence when your teammate is so far ahead of you? You know, a lot does need to be said of Alex Albon's performances, carrying on the form that he had shown the previous year. Albon is carrying the weight of Williams on his shoulders, his performances alone being the only thing keeping the portrait of Margaret Thatcher hanging in Sir Frank's office, alongside, of course, portraits of Ayrton Senna and an abandoned coal mine in County Durham. Williams are not improving anywhere near the level that they should be. They're still straggling toward the back of the grid, and thus those 2 points finishes that Albon has mustered so far have been rewarding for this outfit. He's dominated the qualifying and race battle with Sargent, and his results alone are the only thing keeping Williams ahead of Sauber in the constructors' standings, and potentially in the hunt for 8th with Alpine. Alpine. Whatever happened to them? From a couple of years ago where they looked like a million French francs, they now just look French, in that hang the Olympic flag upside down sort of way, and they're soon bound to be not that French anymore, although they have gotten a bit better lately, and Pierre Gasly has been a big part of that. Reliability problems have been a problem for him this year, and it only compounded what was already a pretty slow start to the year. The only way to stand out from back there was to incur a penalty, and oh boy, he got plenty of them things. But as the car became less crap, Gasly's performances followed suit. After Alpine struggled initially to even get one single solidarity point at the beginning of the year, Gasly went on a 4-race scoring streak, only stopping when a gearbox problem in Silverstone prevented him from racing at all. Patchy in some parts, a standout in others. In a car that's about as recalcitrant as a cat in a bath, every little helps, and he's helping Alpine a lot. Well, at least a little bit more than Esteban Ocon, since he's been the polar opposite of that. One could argue that Ocon was the better driver at the start of the year. Better results and better performances. You know how it all goes. He also scored the team's first point in Miami, but somewhere along the line, Ocon started to get offside with Alpine's management, and Gasly started to sneak ahead in terms of results. Reaching for the skies in Monaco was a little bit ill-advised, and damn nearly resulted in a 1-race vacation heading into Montreal. One of very few times that a team would have had the balls to send a driver packing due to naive bravado. There's not a hell of a lot that I can really add to this, other than, once again, he seems to be leaving a team in acrimonious circumstances, and it all seems to distract from the fact that he can be a commodity when he's got his head on straight. Hopefully he does find greener pastures at his new home for 2025, Haas, who, I'll just say this, I'm sorry. I said at the start of the year that the Haas F1 team was a hopeless case and not truly America's team, and that this would be like any other year where they would start well and then end poorly. Well, I'll gladly go myself. Ayo and the gang have proven me wrong, and Gene Haas apparently does have some sense. He fired Gunter, and he hired the Bear, and he hired Ocon. Okay, we're getting a bit too ahead of ourselves, but otherwise, this season has been relatively impressive. The dude most impressive of all, however, has been Nico Hülkenberg. Like, seriously, I can't lavish enough praise on this guy. You can only perform as well as your car, and Nico here has been maximizing it all the damn time. Points are a constant with him, and he's knocking on the door of the top 10 in the points against an Aston Martin contingent that really should be further up ahead than they actually are. And no, it's not absurd to give him a rating like this, because truthfully, what else do you really expect him to do in that Haas? This is why he's getting that contract with Audi, and it's why he should at least be considered for a top tier seat. After a couple of years ago, where we struggled to see how he would ever get back to Formula 1 at all, now he's a commodity that deserves to stay in the sport for at least a little while longer. I cannot say the same about Kevin Magnussen though, and I know he's a fan favorite, and there's reason for it. Before the last year and a bit, he's just been underwhelming. Aside from his pole position in Brazil 2022, has there been anything since then that made you go, wow, he still got it? If anything, there's been more glum moments than good ones. Too many times he's made mistakes, been knocked out in Q1, been completely left in the dust by Hulk. And that's carried over to this year, and him being dropped in lieu of Ocon and the Bear is no surprise. Time's up, I guess. This time for real. Time to head back and race in America. But that's okay, racing's better there anyway. And hey, who knows, maybe Daniel Ricciardo will follow you there when his time comes to an end in Formula 1. Although, if rumors do hold water, by the time this video is released, he'll instead be en route to the second Red Bull seat. I mean, I don't know, that's just how my videos age. After some great performances, such as in Mexico last year, it was assumed that with a clean slate heading into the year, and a chunk contract to boot, that Danny Big Dick McRick would take the ball by the horns and prove that he belongs back in a top tier seat. And in some events, such as in Miami, he proved that this was indeed the case. But those results, they weren't the norm. In fact, a lot of the time, he was the lesser of the two V-carbs. And with
what was expected of him, that honestly wasn't good enough. Things have been getting slightly better for the Honey Badger in the more recent rounds, but he's only scored half of the points that his teammate has, who for the longest time hasn't been given a look in for that second Red Bull seat. And while, yeah, I don't think he would be headstrong enough to cope with the pressures of racing for the evil empire based on performance alone, I've gotta ask, why the hell isn't Yuki Tsunoda being considered for the main Red Bull seat? Is this because of the Honda dealings? Or am I just being misinformed again? Red Bull boasts a fine driver academy full of some very good talents. Always have done, really. But there does seem to be an inherent lack of confidence when it comes to promoting some of them. Now, if that's because you can't really trust them, then I've got to ask, whose fault is that? If you know what their foibles are, why not work on them? They're your drivers. When Yuki has been on it this year, he has been fantastic. The limelight for AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, Minardi, double the points of Ricciardo, who is demanding Hollywood salaries. He spent more time in the points this year than out of it, while Ricciardo's points tally was substantially boosted from his Miami sprint results alone. Otherwise, it's kind of been a walkover. So once again, this organization that's so big, so powerful, has worked itself into a corner where performances are excellent, but you remain fearful of what would happen if you threw him into the lion's den? You really are having to lie in your own filth, aren't you, Marco? But to be totally fair, at least those development drivers, they are getting a look in. Those Aston Martin ones? Pfft, yeah. I wouldn't hold my breath, because as we all know, one of those seats is the perpetual property of Sir Lancelot Stroll. Oh boy, here we go. Another time where I've got to talk about this guy. Okay, so here goes. He ain't been that bad. What? Sure, the start of the year sucked. As per usual, him running up Honey Badger's badger in Shanghai, the lack of willingness to accept responsibility for that, and his reluctance to be a team player in Hungary put him offside with everyone. But in recent rounds, he has cleaned up his act somewhat in terms of performance, and he is starting to outqualify and outrace his teammates more often than what any of us deem normal. And while that Aston ain't $1 million, you can measure yourself against your teammate, and on paper, he's been fine lately. But here's the thing, despite being given all the opportunities to improve, the greatest job security in the history of Formula 1, and all the resources to boot, the one thing that Big Daddy Lawrence has never been able to buy him is consistency. We've seen this time and again, year in, year out. The same thing every freaking year. Lance will have 4 to 5 good races in a row, a sort of proof of maybe he's found his mojo, and then that form will Amelia Earhart itself again, slipping back into mediocrity for the rest of the season. Again, he has redeemed himself somewhat lately, but exactly how much of that is down to legitimate improvement, or how much of it is down to that annual good run? Or could it be that the Lord of the Eyebrows is starting to fall off a cliff? The idea that Fernando Alonso could possibly be in a performance slump is blasphemous. The start of the year was good, the typical Alonso performance. Same old, nothing special. Not by his standards anyway, but somewhere along the line, the pendulum has swung. Now the results have started to swing the other way. Now we're left questioning whether the other side of the garage has found their form, or whether Eyebrows has lost his. Which is true, I can't say for sure. But despite some of the great drives and saves that we've seen from him this year, this has been a bit of a downer from what we saw last year. Perhaps the bar was set a bit too high in that regard. He's still the better driver at Aston, but he's slipping a little bit. Still, at least it's nowhere near as bad as what it has been for Sergio Perez. That guy? Starting off the season, the results were about what you would expect from the guy, finishing runner-up, while his teammate sprinted off into the distance. But even as early as Melbourne, there were concerns about whether his pace was all there. A dominant car can mask these types of issues, but once the pack did start to catch up, the lack of pace was damning, and it started affecting Red Bull badly. It's one thing to not finish directly behind your teammate, it's another to be seconds a lap slower, to be constantly knocked out in Q1, and struggling to score points in a car that at least should be fighting for podiums. Has there been anything good to say about his year? Well, he has at least been calmer than his teammate over the radio. By the time this video's out, he could very well be gone, or he could be living to fight another day. Then again, the results have been unacceptable, especially given how most other teammates up and down the grid haven't struggled even half as badly. I mean, take Oscar Piastri for instance. Despite his impressive debut in Formula 1, it is clear who the better driver has been at McLaren so far this year.
it wasn't him. But that doesn't mean to say he's been mid either. Time and again, he has shown pace and an ice-cold, calm demeanor that ensures that nothing would ever rattle him, no matter how high the pressure may be cranked up. His maiden win in Hungary was overshadowed by a cacophony of numbskulledness from the McLaren pit wall, but it shouldn't detract from the job he put in regardless. He might not have been the better McLaren driver in the first half of the year, but he sure as hell hasn't been far off. The future of McLaren is in safe hands. Then again, is he destined to remain there for very long? After all, we know how McLaren can be with, contracts. And didn't Lewis Hamilton say he wanted to remain at McLaren for the rest of his career at one stage? And then he went off to Mercedes. I wonder how that went. Well, now, actually, after a couple of years of relative hell for the 105-time Grand Prix winner, perhaps his move to Ferrari was a little ill-timed, given Uncle Fred's struggles to make sense of the Scuderia and Merck's resurgence from the midfield. This year seemed to start off like the previous two, a car not reacting to how they would want. But then something started to click with that team after about a dozen rounds, and that paralleled with Lewis's form in the teammate battle. Initially, it was one that he was losing, but then as the car began to pick up pace, he himself started to remind everyone that, yeah, he is all that. The best car arguments, this guy is and always will be different gravy. And this all came to a head at Silverstone. At first, he was merely hanging on to his teammates' coattails, but once British water was added, he was just in a class of one and took his first Grand Prix win since 2021. Throw in a couple of podiums and another win in Spa, and it almost seems as if he's found his mojo again, if he at all even lost it. But it would be a fool's errand to suggest that it's been a standout half year for him that would warrant an A+++ rating, because initially, at the start of the year, it seemed as if teammate George Russell was the better driver. When your teammate is Sir Lewis freaking Hamilton and you're finishing ahead of him, you know you're doing bits. George can be very proud with how a lot of this year has gone. His win in Austria was a bit of a fluke, but hey, he wasn't the one moving in the braking zone or being moved into in the braking zone, so hey, passive Darwinism at play there, I guess. Though it has felt in more recent races that Lewis is starting to rein him in again and reassert himself as the king of the throne in Mercedes, and being disqualified in Spa was a rancid way to cap off what was an otherwise really damn good drive. Either way, he has been a worthy match for a guy who has been king of the yard for a very long time, and he's gonna need that form heading into next year, whether his teammate will be the reigning world champion or Kimi Antonelli, or in a less likely scenario, Carlos Sainz, although his attitude lately has got team managers up and down the paddock like,
make a move and stick with it, would you?
Heading into the start of the season, Carlos Sainz was effectively jobless. He made himself the biggest free agent around with his storming start to the year, where he established himself as arguably the better Ferrari driver around. He's always had his loyal supporters who have said this was always the case, but in terms of results and in performance, this became a more widely accepted thing. It fell a little bit by the wayside as the year went on, hence why you should never count your hatches before they chicken. But once he stops messing around and finally picks a team from the menu, he could then make the most of his time at Ferrari by proving that while he may not have the absolute pace that the top brass do, he can at least always deliver something, or at least keep it out of the barriers. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Charles? My belief that Charles Leclerc is the second coming of Gilles Villeneuve will undoubtedly earn me a travel ban from Canada and Italy and anywhere else with common decency, since that really is a blasphemous thing to say. You dare compare this bottle job with the great Gilles Villeneuve, arguably the greatest driver to never win the world championship? But when you think about it, a demonically fast francophone who is hugely popular with the Tifosi yet just can't seem to keep it out of the barrier, is it really that far-fetched? Leclerc's year thus far has been really patchy. At times he's proven to be the guy, other times he's been his own worst enemy. Again, his win on the streets of Monaco was a dream 10 years in the making that unified the world for at least a brief second. And whenever Ferrari haven't been themselves, he's consistently been finishing ahead of Sainz. And that's not meant to be a slight at Sainz, because Charles' racecraft has been borderline unbelievable, and he's gonna need that next year when Hammer comes to Maranello. He just needs to iron out those bumps if he's gonna prove a threat in the title race, or even in the teammate battle, though he's not alone in that regard. If you were to say that a title battle was on for 2024 at the start of the year, you would be looked at as if you were smoking something that was outlawed in the Reagan years. Here we are, halfway through the season, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we might have something here. But at the same time, kinda not. The main protagonist in all of this is the McLaren of Lando Norris, and so far, he's had a breakout year with a slight asterisk attached to it. On one hand, his pace has been outstanding, clearly on top of his car that has proven to be the best on the grid for at least a fair chunk of the time. Having said that, perhaps we are back in a time where there is no dominant car anymore, that we just don't know who could win week in and week out between 7 or 8 drivers. We are eating good again as Formula 1 fans. Lando has been particularly solid in the last stint of a Grand Prix, and a lot of times this year, he's found himself in positions to win Grand Prix, but it's the execution of those moments that have let him down. For however much good he's done, he's learning on the fly that to challenge for the title, he needs to be virtually faultless, to take his opportunities, and to not mess it up. But too many times this year, he has messed it up. He keeps harping on that he would have won if he did this, if he did that. F1 is if spelt backwards after all. I want to laud this guy, but he just keeps on shooting himself in the foot. And he's also got to ponder the notion of being cold, of unleashing his inner Michael Schumacher. It was commendable what he did in Hungary, but I just got an unerring feeling that come Abu Dhabi, those 7 points are going to matter, especially so when your championship rival is none other than Max Verstappen. A lot has been made of Max in recent rounds, and the media has made every effort to make it seem he's the devil for some reason. And while Max certainly has his issues, and he can be polarizing, the notion that he can't win or even race without a dominant car underneath him is nonsense on a level so far gone that it's just not worth entertaining anymore. Time and again this year, he's proven he's the goddamn Terminator of Formula 1. Cold-blooded approach to racing that ensures that if a win is at all possible, even in a Red Bull that isn't the king of the yard anymore, he'll get it done or die trying. It's that last one that needs a bit of a tweak. But otherwise, aside from a couple of glitches here and there, it's another year in Max's world that we'll all learn to appreciate at some point. At least once he and Lewis can stop getting all
Go f yourself! Go f yourself! Go f yourself!
So, yeah. There you have it. Well, I'm sure you've all got some takes on this. Some stuff you agree, some stuff you don't. Some of that quite violently. And you know, that's cool. So, yeah. Thank you for watching, and don't be a manus, I guess.